and welcome to another episode of Insightfully Speaking, a podcast by Kardec Group. I'm Adam Osborne and I'm joined by my two co-hosts, Annie Sinclair and Humberto Schubert, along with a special guest as we investigate recent events, news and other interesting things while looking at the world from a spiritist perspective. Our special guest today is Wagner de Assis from Brazil. In this episode, we are going to be looking at Spiritism in the arts. We'll have some more details about Divaldo Schubert. We have a question for What Does Spiritism Say About? And we'll be looking at the rise of an unlikely YouTube star. But first, let's say hello to my co-hosts. Hello Annie, hello Humberto, how are you both?
Hi Adam, all good, thank you. Here we are. It's just incredible how time just goes so fast from one month to the next. It just seems like yesterday we were recording, isn't it? So all cool here, thank you.
Hi Adam, I'm very fine. Thank you for your usual kindness. And here in Brazil, the overall situation of the pandemic improved a little bit. So we are a bit more optimistic about that.
Unfortunately, we can't say the same here because we have the Delta variant still wreaking havoc, unfortunately. But the government think it's fine for us to go out without a mask. So let's see what will happen in the next few weeks. Now, Humberto, last episode we started to talk a bit about your grandmother, Divaldo Schubert, and her contributions toward the Spiritist movement. What more can you tell us about her work and her publications?
Yeah, she was quite a prolific writer with about 20 titles, which sold approximately 500,000 books. And that makes her sort of cultural phenomena in Brazil, at least among the Brazilian spiritists. And most of these books were dedicated to mediumship. And to some extent, we can say that she was very well known for her works on mediumship and somehow an authority in the field.
Yeah. And no, I think definitely there's a lot that we can learn from her works, and the example that she gave in general as well. So thank you for that extra information, and we hope to be able to get some more things in the future as well. But now let's bring on our guest. Wagner de Assis is a director, producer and screenwriter from Brazil who has worked on various spiritualist and spiritist related projects, including the 2010 film adaptation of the André Louis book Nosso Lar, Astral City, and the 2019 Netflix biographic Kardec, based on the life of a certain Allan Kardec, as well as Brazilian telenovela Além do Tempo, Time After Time. Wagner, thank you for being with us today. How are you, and how have you been during the pandemic?
Hello, Adam. Hello, Anne and Humberto. It's a really pleasure to be here. I'm trying to be all the time connected with everyone else during this pandemic time. So I thank you for the invitation, and it's always interesting to speak about spiritism, and art, and I think this is my preferred issue, my preferred subject, and I'm glad to be here. I'm really glad to be here around you. I'm a fan, and I read a few of the books about Divaldo Schubert, and it's been a pleasure all this time. Nevertheless, we have a pandemic around, even in Brazil or in the UK or the whole world. But we're going through.
Yeah. Well, it's a pleasure for us to have you with us today, and we'd love to talk a bit more about your work in a few moments. But first, let's look at some interesting recent news. Has a 400-year-old self-help enigma finally been solved? Robert Burton's book, The Anatomy of Melancholy, first published in 1621, was written to help explain the various causes of all things that have gone wrong with the mind, and is filled with over 13,000 pieces of Latin verse, philosophical quotes, and Shakespearean analogies that seem to have no direct link to the purpose of the book itself. A new 1,376-page edition hopes to bring light to the quizzical book, which actually gives practical advice that is still valid today, such as the importance of making time to talk to people, tips on having a good herbal bath, and taking mindful exercise. Some of the topics in the book include troublesome dreams, how to be amended, coffee, a Turkish cordial drink, immortality of the soul proven, and music, present remedy for melancholy. The book ends with Burton saying, "Be not solitary, be not idle." I know that many spiritists like small books of reflection, but I don't think a pocket edition of this will be available at any time soon. Do we need to rethink human evolution? A human skull has been found from a new human species that is a branch closer to modern humans than Neanderthals. The Dragon Man, or Homo longi, lived in China around 146,000 years ago, and had a much larger skull than ourselves, which would indicate that on average would have been a lot taller than modern humans. The skull was originally found by a Chinese labourer over 90 years ago, but was kept wrapped up and hidden in a cupboard until just recently. Although there is debate as to exactly what branch of humanity this skull is from within our ancestral evolutionary tree, a professor from University College London has said, "It adds even more evidence that human evolution was not a simple evolutionary tree, but a dense, intertwined bush. We now know that there were as many as 10 different species of hominins at the same time as our own species emerged. So it just goes to show that you never know what you can find at the back of your wardrobe." So, guys, do any of you have any old mystical books on the shelves or ancient obscure objects that should be in a museum?
I don't have anything that should be in the museum, but just when you were saying that, it was making me think that one of my favorite phrases is, "There's variety in nature, and variety and multiplicity is everywhere." And sometimes we come from a habit or let's say an education that makes everything black or white, or this or that. And actually, everything, there's lots of different colors. There's lots of different varieties of everything. And when we think, like somebody has a baby and can be a certain weight or a different weight, there is no sort of like this is the average person, because each one is totally individual. We are all totally individual, and our experiences on earth, our body is the instrument for our experience, and it's totally individual. So when we start thinking of the past, we have very few pieces of the jigsaw, very few pieces. And sometimes we're trying to have, let's say, 1,000-piece jigsaw. We've got 2 pieces and we're wondering where they go. That's the kind of image that I sometimes think about. But it's good. At least we have a couple of pieces. Slowly we'll go putting others, and at some point we might have a greater picture.
I remember Emmanuel's book called No Caminho da Luz, and when you mentioned there was this guy 147,000 years ago, I immediately remember Emmanuel saying that we've came from other planets as well. We were risen from the apes because it was part of our development, and evolution progress. And I think that so many things yet to be discovered by scientists and researchers all over the world, that we are not even close to understand our origin and to understand indeed where we came from and where we're heading to. So it's amazing that every time we go further and further in time, back and back in time, and understanding that we've been such a journey. It's been such a journey, and we can't complain about time anymore, right? Don't know if I came from another planet. It was probably an unevolved planet, a lesser evolved planet than Earth. But I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to discover these things and to tell those stories, because this is something that we shall do. It's telling those stories that we're going to learn from ourselves.
Well, I'm not sure if it's a node or a more recent discovery, but it seems to be a fact by now that human race mixed with other humanoid species like Neanderthals and others, which is quite fascinating because it could have all sorts of implications about our understanding of how humanity evolved. Some of human folks may have small connections to these already extinguished humanoids, and it also has an interesting implication on racism, because we are still fighting about very tiny changes among the human species, while our ancestors actually breed with other species, with members of other species. And I think this is quite fascinating, and it is to some extent mind-blowing. It makes us rethink all we know about our biological nature.
It also makes me just think about, like Wagner was saying as well, and you about time and where we come from. And now, like, for example, we're living in the pandemic where time is distorted in some ways because we're all living like at a certain level of anxiety about when is it going to end, when are things going to go back to normal. And actually, I was thinking, if we think back, so who knows when our origin is, who knows if we've even come from other planets. As a spirits, we've been living for such a long time, so that we can release a bit of our anxiety about time and really incorporate the moment. This is the moment that I'm living. This is all I must be, focusing on now, and not be worrying about the past and the future, but really sort of developing more of that, what you call it, being in the now, being present at this moment and saying, I am experiencing this moment in my evolution, in my story, in my history, and I am experiencing it fully, rather than thinking, well, I hope tomorrow things will be better. I hope tomorrow, or before it was be better, So you're just thinking, yeah, those are references, but what is what is now, this very moment. So this is an exercise I'm doing for myself, and I'm no master at it for anyway, but I just thought it's interesting how this pandemic has introduced this opportunity of thinking about being in the now.
Yeah, great reflections. Thank you, everyone. But let's move on to something a bit more creative. So over the past few years, there have been a lot of interesting spiritual and spiritualistic films, theatre plays and TV shows which include spirits and mediums. In general, most of these put spirits in a negative light and mediums as either an evil or even comical character. In comparison to the UK or Europe, Brazil is a very openly spiritual country, and there have been various spiritualistic and spiritist films and telenovelas that have been widely accepted by people who are not from a spiritist or spiritualistic background. There have been films regarding the lives of Brazilian mediums Chico Xavier and Divaldo Franco, films about Bezerra de Menezes, and as we mentioned, our guest Wagner produced the film version of Nosso Lar, Astral City, the story of the spirit André Luiz, which was psychographed by the medium Chico Xavier in the 1940s. Even though most spiritist films are not available in English, there are, of course, many good spiritualistic films and television shows which are. Pixar's Soul follows the journey of a man who temporarily finds himself in the spiritual plane. BBC's critically acclaimed comedy Ghosts follows the story of a young woman who inherits a mansion filled with spirits, and only she can see them. A high-budget film adaptation of Noel Coward's play Blithe Spirit was released in 2020, which is about a hapless medium who evokes an author's ex-wife, but only the author is able to see the spirit. And of course, there was the bizarre Netflix comedy The Good Place, which followed a group of people surviving events in the afterlife. Have any of you watched any of these? And also, how important do you think it is to bring spiritualist and spiritist stories to life via film, television, and art?
I would like to start by saying that pretty much every human being watched movies that present spiritist tenets or ideas through the lens of horror. And this depictions of gloomy and spooky spirituality may be a very bad first impression that is difficult to wipe out. On the other hand, I'm a big fan of Korean series and movies, which are quite spiritualistic, and it is actually very rare to find a series or a movie without one single deceased soul trying to communicate with the so-called living or the embodied persons. And since we have this different cultural approach to survival after death in media, it is interesting to investigate more carefully how is it conceived, to what sort of purposes, and how could it be changed somehow through a cultural process if we reflect more on what are we feeding to the population in terms of understanding of their own ultimate reality.
Well, I also think that, whenever you have a movie or a play, you have the opportunity of watching it and reflecting on it with let's say, with your family, with your friends, and say, what did you think of that? Do you think, it's possible, it's not possible? It's really interesting. All kinds of things appear in different places. I saw, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, I saw a play here in London a few years ago. They had a festival of Spanish theatre from the 1500s. And one of the plays was by Juana Inés de la Cruz, also known nowadays to the Spiritists as Joanna de Ângelis. And it was amazing because we went to the theatre with my friend and we sat down and we were like excited. And the players were Shakespearean players and actors, and it was all in English. It was a translation into English. It was a comedy. It was really funny, and it had all kinds of unexpected things. You thought, oh wow, in the times of the Inquisition, were they allowed to say these things or to present this? Just making it, and they would stop and they say, yes, this nun wrote these things, saying she was one very brave woman at the time to be exposing these things, but she did it as comedy, and it was so interesting. It generated such a lot of discussion, and even like say the actors would come out. So you're thinking, I think, whoa, this is going back 500 years, and so now maybe we have movies. We didn't have movies 500 years ago, but we have theatre, we have music, we have books. So the way we communicate through art, its way is bringing us to think about things, provoking that discussion, and I think that's invaluable because it is a way of perhaps bringing up something that you wouldn't be able to say or didn't know how to broach the subject. And by watching it together with others, you say, oh, what do you think about that? Do you think it's like that? and you know, it can generate some discussion, and I think that's really lovely.
I've watched almost all of them that you mentioned, Adam, because I keep a radar open to what I call, to me, it's the final issue. This is the last frontier that we have to trespass. So it is something that guides my works. Everywhere I have to make a choice. Every time I have to pick up a story to tell, I'm gonna ask myself, do I want to spend 5 years working on that 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and not having it as something relevant to me? And when I say no, I just discard it, because it's something that it has to make a sense. And nevertheless, this is something that has been always present in the movies, and we haven't noticed as something spiritualistic in the movie. I'm gonna give you an example. Akira Kurosawa, Dreams, the movie called Dreams from Akira Kurosawa, the great Japanese filmmaker. They have a scene where the army is dead, and the captain is dead, telling them that they were dead. And it is totally based on the spiritualistic idea that life goes on. What I think, and this is something that is a Brazilian legacy to the world of culture and the spiritualism philosophy, is that even though it started in France the way we know now, and it has roots in America, as we've heard before, what has been done in Brazil is something that is now exporting to the rest of the world, which is the unbelievable amount of books that were produced during the 20th century through mediums like Humberto's grandmother. So that's something that makes Brazil very unique over that. Just like mentioning Chico Xavier, it's been 500 books as well, millions of books sold as well. You can't find that anywhere in the world. So what the blend that it provokes to those who produce art that is based on that kind of story is something very unique. And this is something that attracts me as well. It is something that really guides what I want to say. And within my next 10 movies, if I may say so, there are 10 movies about that kind of theme, that kind of story. Because also, one final note, to me, we're not creating a genre of movie making called spiritist films. We're just telling the same stories, the drama, the comedy, just like Annie said, or the sci-fi movie, or even though the horror movie can be made. But if you stick into the philosophy that we've learned through all those books, it's going to be made in a different way. I keep saying that if I were to produce a series like Dark, which tells about time traveling or based on reincarnation issues, on different lives and in connections of past lives and so on, I could have made that much more interesting and people less confused about connecting, connecting characters, because what we're saying is something that connects to the heart and soul and connects to the mind as well. It's understandable. So faith and reason can be together even though when we're producing art. And that's something that it's my radar. It's something that guides me everywhere I go in terms of what I read or what I write or what to do.
That's great. Now, and as you mentioned about Chico Xavier and over 500 books, and let's talk about Astral City, which is a very important spiritist book, like we said before, from the spirit André Louise, and was the first in the Life in the Spiritual World series, which was psychographed by the medium Francisco Cândido Xavier, or Chico Xavier, and highlight some of the aspects of what happens in the spiritual plane. Now, the film version of this book is phenomenal in every sense of the word, and so when adapting a book for theatre or film, there are elements that need to be removed or added so that the audience can follow the story and stay interested. So Wagner, when you were making that film, which was released in 2010, how difficult was it for you to decide what parts of the book should be kept in the final version?
It was really hard. First of all, it took me like a year and a half to understand what was really the core of the book in terms of what should be in the theater, in the movie. I made several interviews with former readers, and sometimes I was posing small questions like, put yourself in front of the city, and I'm here in front of the city, there's a wall, okay, turn your back to the wall, okay, I can do that in my mind, so now what do you see? I don't know. So cinematographically speaking, in terms of movie narration, there is a ton of details that are not in the book, and this is something that has to be filled with narrative and movie making story. And also, the book is about a city, so it has like 25 different stories that could be parallel stories, or I could tell the story of André Luiz and a B, a C, a D stories as well, which actually I try to put as much story as possible within the texture of the narration. But most of all, I needed to pick up the main character, which is André Luiz, the doctor. And in the end, I could check that I was telling the stories of the first 2-3 chapters and the last 2-3 chapters, and pointing out a little bit of what happens in between them, because this is what happens to Andrea, and even though they are in just the first 2 or the last 2 chapters, there is a lot in there. It's the deeper story that goes beneath it, because this is something that wakes up after dead, and that's the whole difference of paradox. I was just like pondering with myself the other day, like the weight of eternity, and this is something that we do a lot when we were creating André Luiz as a character to the movies. And it is someone it is a smart man, it is someone that understands life, it is a physician, but suddenly you get yourself facing the hardest question of all. It's the weight of eternity. How do you deal with that? Because that is something that, to me and to the character as well, it changes everything else. It changed the whole understanding of life. That's philosophical, way too philosophical. We're gonna find that at Kardec as well, but we can talk that later. But I mean, when we discovered what was the core of the character, philosophically speaking, we could understand his conflicts, which were understanding where he was, how to deal with that new reality, and also about the missing of the family, and also how do I do to go back to my family, and new laws. And some people think Nosso Lar, Astral City, is a sci-fi movie. Nosso Lar now, Astral City now, has been released in different levels in more than 45 countries, which is something spectacular to a movie that has been released 11 years ago, almost 11 years ago, which makes me keep speaking about the movie. That is my satisfaction music, Rolling Stones has to sing Satisfaction all the time. I don't hesitate to speak about Astral City, because I know it still rolls the dice. It still goes on with people who see or watch it for the first time, and they get stoked and they get, wow, what is it? So to understand the core of it, it was a whole process of what was the essence of the thing, and in the end, it's where we came from and where we're going to and who we are. That's all the major questions that all the philosophers do pose to themselves. It's something that I think it was proper to the characters as well.
And mentioning about seeing it for the first time, I saw the film for the first time in 2011 in Brazil, and I hadn't read the book because I hadn't had access to an English copy. But when I saw it, I thought, I have to read the book. For me, it was so well made and aligned so well to how I understood everything of that aspect of the afterlife anyway, that for me is a perfect film to watch. So thank you for making the film.
We didn't want to tell the whole book. We didn't want the story of the whole book. It is undoable, if I may say so. May I say so? Undoable, right? And it was about the core of the story. It was much more about the core of the story. And in America, you're going to find it probably at Disney Plus or Hulu, because Disney has bought Fox Films, and all the property were passed to Disney. And that's even a joke. Who has watched the movie? First time I've been at Disney with the executives in Brazil, and I just told them, you know, guys, you don't need to produce a park for Astral City. We do have a park as well. All you need is to die. And then they was like staring at me, and I said, "Oh, what is that about?" And no, that was just an internal joke. And then a few of them understood because they have seen it. So there's no need to create a park. It's there already.
Well, you never know. You never know. There might be a part of opening up in Disney Orlando. You never know.
There are, I mean, Adam, people, it's endless, but I love it. Everyone has watched the movie, has a personal story to tell, where I work, just like what you've just did. You know, it's unbelievable that people can relate a certain moment of their lives where they got into a theater room and they watched the movie, and that changes something. The movie was meant to tell the story, and I give all the credits to the story itself. It's okay. I did the movie. I directed the movie. I wrote the movie. Okay, but I mean, to me, the weight of it, the thing that has the power of it, is the courage of the spirit André Luiz, and yet how do I say illibality? Oh, I mean the ilibado. How do I say that, Humberto? The honesty, the credibility, the honesty, and the amazing work of Chico Xavier. And when I just, there is something that is interesting as well. I mean, in the end of the movie, I put some credits and then I decided to say, I want to dedicate this movie to André Luiz, to Chico Xavier, André Luiz, and all the people in Nosso Lar. And several watchers would come to me and say, "What is that? That is for real? I mean, isn't it only a movie? You know, how do you say that is based on a book? And is that a documentary?" And then people were really confused about that, because somehow in the end of the story, they were presented the idea that, you know what, this might be real, and this kind of was spinning out people's minds everywhere in South Africa, in Turkey and Japan, and everywhere people would come to me speaking about that. It was very interesting, and this is, I really understand that this is because of Chico, and this is why Nosso Lar as a book is translated and is sold everywhere in the world as well. You can find it at the spiritual international printers, right? And it's something that keeps rolling on, and it doesn't stop.
Well, I have to express how privileged I feel for being in this show and have so many guests that deliver us so profound and touching words as these. And just to make a small link between what you just said, Wagner, to your previous discourse about the purpose in life, about doing something meaningful with the tools, opportunities, the time you have to invest in some project. If you are free to choose what to do in life, And we have so much potential. We have so many opportunities. Especially artists and people who work with education or with communication somehow, they always have opportunity to choose to inspire people, to give something that is substantial, that can move people to a better stage of their lives. And it is sad that all this power, all this freedom is not enjoyed as it should be.
Right. Thank you.
You were mentioning about some of the other books from Chico Xavier, and we've heard that the next film based on the André Louis series is in production. Is there anything you can tell us about that?
It is, yes, it's gonna be in production. We started pre-productions, but we had to interrupt it due to the pandemic. So we are now waiting for the Brazilian agency allow us to liberate other funds and the deals in order to start principal photography, because we're gonna have to pass through pre-production again a little bit, but mostly we're gonna go for shooting, what you call principal photography. And it's based on the book, which is the second book of André Louis' series about the spiritual life, which is called The Messengers. So we are internally calling it Nosso Lar, or Astral City 2, The Messengers. And why we're doing that? Because our plans are based on shooting at least a trilogy, or at least 4 of the books. And so the other one would be the Brazilian version, which is called Obreiros da Vida Eterna, which is like the workers of eternal life, which to me is really cinematographic. There's like fire from the sky, a house that takes place. There's war in the umbral zones, and it's very cinematographic, and it's very specific in terms of putting people a different view of the spiritual world. And I might say that, and the other one is called Libertação, the liberty, which this is a movie itself. When you read the book, you say, "Oh my God, this is ready for the theater, for the screen," and we also plan to do that as well.
Yeah, that's definitely a very deep and dark story in that one.
Yes, yes, and I might say, Adam, when we just created the idea of the umbral zone, the purgatorial zone, we had to escape from some cliches. I didn't want red fire like the hell or whatever, and we had to make a lot of adjustments from what is described in the book originally, because if we went to describe or to shoot the way it was in the book, we were going to scare a lot of people, and we didn't want to really scare people. We just want to shake them, otherwise people would be like, really, oh my God, what is it? Somehow the movie somehow touches people in different places, and this is completely unpredictable in terms of some people. They stop watching it at first. It takes them like 6 months to go back and watch it, because it has some connections. It is magical. It is really magic, and it has connections with their own stories, with their souls, or with their understandings, that it's like shaking their ideas of the paradox of eternal life. And this is very powerful, and I confess it is amazing to watch the way it provokes this part of me, even though the movie, it stands alone. He does his job. We just like control it now, but it goes along, and it's very interesting to watch.
Maybe I will say something a little bit out there at this point, because just as you were saying that, I was just remembering something, like when, let's say I'm watching the movie for the first time or second, and then, like you say, certain scenes or certain phrases even, or passages suddenly connect with me in some strange way. And I always say we are on an incarnation, as with a team. it's a team effort, our incarnation. We are here, but we have a team supporting us, just like the athletes. They're running out alone, but they have a whole team behind them. So we are the same. We have a whole spiritual team that's, helping us on this journey. And I think that they stimulate us at the different passages to remind us of agreements, the suggestions, things that we need to sometimes remember, even if it's unconsciously, like to bring us out of our inertia, to break us out of our habitual way of doing things, to help us to blossom forth. And I am totally convinced that when you're watching, it's like when you're reading a book as well, but when you're watching a movie like that, the good spirits, our benefactors, they take the advantage of that to stimulate us. So the reach of the movies is much further than simple entertainment, in my view.
Now, we just mentioned Disney before, and I watched a couple movies about Walt Disney, and he seemed to be one of these artists very committed to the improvement of humanity, to produce things that were absolutely meaningful, and maybe eternal is exaggerated, but things that could be permanent and not subordinated to other sorts of interests, even financial interests. And I don't want to move into the next subject already, but I think about Wagner de Assis' work and what he's doing, and I cannot stop imagining how important it may be for himself as something that you reflect about in your own life experience, to meet people that never heard about Kardec, that never heard about Astral City in their lives, and they have the first contact through these movies. So I can only imagine that it may be a very powerful experience, and you may feel at the same time privileged and with a heavy burden of great responsibility.
You just pointed the right words, Humberto. It is a mix of gratitude and responsibility as well. Indeed, it's endless the way people react to the movies and the way it comes back to me in a certain way. This is something that there's only one word to say, which is thank you, always. And it's been 11 years, and it was like it was last year, because we have demands of interview. We speak about the stories. If I were to answer all the interview demands, I would be online every day, and I simply can't, because I say that I'm gonna be speaking the same stuff on, and you're not gonna listen to me anymore in a few years, but on the other hand, I understand people that relate to the stories and they want to be part of it, and they want to just express with a lot of gratitude what they've been through, and I totally connect, and I just sit and listen, which is something that really feels the joy and gives us strength to go on, to keep shooting. There is besides those books, there are other movies that I'm gonna make, and we are in development. It took me like all this year and a half of the pandemic. All that I could do was writing scripts and trying to close deals with other producers and other distributors and finding money, which is something that I haven't been quite successful until now. But I know the time comes. When the time comes, it's gonna happen, and it is rewarding, and at the same time, it is demanding. And this is it. I mean, I wouldn't see myself in any other position now. As a journalist and as a filmmaker, I'm totally devoted to what I'm doing right now. And this is why when I see you guys, or when I understand people who have watched the movie and that made a difference in their lives, it pays off. It really pays off. It's priceless as well.
Well, talking about the materialistic financial side of things, now we know that Astral City was actually one of the biggest budget Brazilian films when it was released. And there have been other Spiritist films and theatre plays which have been lacking a little bit because they've mainly been using volunteers and not had much funding. So do you think there's any reason why there's a lack of funding for Spiritist or spiritualist films and plays?
In Brazil, in general, Brazilian is from the late 2.5 years, we're facing a lack of investment at all because there is no political of culture investment. But within the late 10 years, I think people were expecting a new genre of movies, and that was wrong. I mean, we should just be telling the stories instead of saying there is a new genre of movies which are the spiritualistic movies. But we forgot to ask ourselves, or even ask the market, if there was a specific public to that, which is wrong. I mean, people go to the movie to watch good stories. Why people go to the movie? To watch a good story, well told. This is the basic answer, and it doesn't matter if that is a love story or a sci-fi story. It matters if it's good enough and it is professional enough. So. And this is also a dilemma of the filmmaker, adjusting the story to the money or fighting for the money, for the right money for the story. In order to answer that at Astral City, my position was I have to find the proper money for the story. Otherwise, we don't tell the story the way it should be told. And this is something that it follows me in different levels. I did a movie called The Indigo Child, which is still in Brazil. We're trying to make deals outside to the international market. But I could understand that it was a lesser, bigger budget, and that would be providing the story that I wanted to tell. Which means that it was a trademark finding all that money from Astral City, and having Philip Glass as a composer, which is one of the biggest film composers ever, and doing the post-production in Canada, in Toronto, at a company that works for Hollywood and for independent producers, and have a director of photography that was hosted in Los Angeles, which is Uli Steiger. So those things that they answer something that is really clear when you make a movie. It's making a movie something so difficult, Adam and Eileen and Humberto, because it's the mix. It's unlikely mix of industry and art, and they are hard to connect, right? So what you do is create bridges between them. What is going to be art and what has to be industry, because one feels the other, one connects to the other in different points. And at that moment, being a producer is good as well, because decisions can be made with the look on the artistic side and not leaving the arm on the industry side. It happened in Kardec as well. To me, like shooting in any other city instead of Paris would be a flop. Like, okay, let's pretend we are in Paris shooting in Prague. Why? We're not going to see the Seine, the river. We're not going to see and then suddenly, when I first came to Paris to do a pre-location scout, and we just look into that church, which Notre Dame, and I said, you see, guys, where are we going to find that? The church is a character in the movie. So we're going to shoot around this church because this is part of the story. If we were in Lisbon, or if you were in Buenos Aires, anywhere that we can find like French architecture, pretending to be, because movies make a lot of that. They go to other place, they do a lot of VFX, and they pretend to be at a certain place. But for Kardec, we would get so much gain for the story. We'd get so much power, looking to that Parisian light, to that those bridges, and this is where the character was walking 150 years ago, and it made a lot of difference. and then that is a money that you have to spend. And I wouldn't shoot anywhere else. And the producers, they work for Conspiração, Eliana Soares, which is the main producer there. She just bought my idea and said, okay, you know what? We're going to rush like crazies. We're going to do like 12-hour shooting in Paris. We're going to do the most amount of scenes we can in these exteriors, because we wanted to do exterior scenes. And you're not going to sleep for 4 days, but you're going to do that in Paris. Sounds right? I said, perfect. Let's go. And this is what happened, actually.
I was about to ask about that film specifically because, Kardec is the biographic of this French educator who, and we mentioned this in our previous episode, that if it wasn't for his investigations, Spiritism might not be here in the way it currently is. So you already mentioned about this importance of filming in France, but again, a bit like my question regarding Astral City, Nosso Lar, how difficult was it for you to decide what aspects of Kardec's life you could actually include in the film?
It was really difficult to have them. I mean, there is not a weight of how hard it was. It was really hard. Because, and that is something that we had to understand exactly who Kardec or Divaldo, the French professor, was at first. And I think we were just peeling the onion, to understand what was in the middle of it. And once we understood, and when I say we, I say me and Marcel Sotomayor, who wrote the book, where we tried to base a little bit the story of the movie, because I've known Kardec prior to Marcel. I read Marcel originals, I kind of helped Marcel to finish the originals, and it was his idea to bring Kardec to the screen. I was like, oh my God, I never thought of that. And it's true. I was like working in other stores, and then he said, you have to bring Kardec to the movies. I said, you know what? You're right. Why I haven't thought of that before, and let's go. And then we just realized that we had to tell the story of a transformation after like years of understanding what the story were. Because it is indeed, again, from a point A to a point B, as all characters are. But I mean, in that moment, it was a man that discovered a treasure, a small treasure, that changed his life so much that he wanted to share with people. And this is what happens to everyone who understands what the spiritualistic doctrine is. This is something that is very rational. You're going to find yourself telling people, it's all rational. You have to understand, we are here because of that. It's the reincarnation. It's the immortality. It's like God as a principle, not as a human being, or not a dead man in the Sistine Chapel that Leonardo da Vinci painted. That's not God. Oh, this God that kills people, that's not God. That's something else. And all this idea that the professor dived into all those years, it was less important than his own transformation. So when he phrases that you're gonna meet a person who understands spiritualism or spiritism by the power of its own transformation. This is his own lines, right? He said that, and to me, it was like he's speaking about himself. He just changed his name. He loses friends. He leaves all the diplomas behind to be a man defending the afterlife in a Paris filled with rationalism, filled with the doctrine of materialism. I mean, 1848 was it was when Karl Marx wrote the manifest, the communistic manifest. And like 7 years later, Kardec was sitting in a room where a table was lifting off alone. This is completely other words, and when we understood that we had to tell the story of the transformation, it kind of opened up a real sense of what the movie was about. So the movie is not about the spiritualistic doctrine. This is for people who want to get out of the movie and go to the spiritualist book and understand what it is all about. I mean, we just answer one question within the whole movie, which is, what is God, right? All the other questions are not answered in purpose because we don't want to create a sense of doctrine idea. But yet, that man, that character, he made those questions to himself, because those are questions that we make to ourselves as well. And those questions were answered. So if you want to learn about that, go to the books. Those are the path to the answers. But instead, if you want to see how hard it is to be living under that idea that life goes on, that we are humans that are living a material, that we are spirits living in a material experience and so on. This is something that was powerful, and that is something that I follow a lot, which is what in the spiritualistic doctrine is universal. I mean, I would say everything, right? But in terms of the movie, what is that can be understood from people in every religion, in every philosophy, in every country? What is the universal aspect of the story we are telling? When and if we understand that, it gets easier, because then we can open up the window and say, listen, watch this story. It's not about this religion, which is, to me, the spiritism is not even a religion the way it is. I mean, it is not. Kardec said that, it is a doctrine with philosophy and science and religious consequences. So to me, it is when we invite people from every place in society, watch this story, give it a chance, see what it is all about, and now you just create your own conclusions. But this is something that was real. I think we are making the right choices, and this is something that I follow in every story we make. Is like public is just public is something that is we have to respect the most, and we just can't give them a closed story. We have to read 5 books to understand that story. That's wrong. That's totally wrong. And you can't blame me that in Spiritism you have such amazing stories. I mean, Sueli wrote amazing stories that could be shot, and Chico, Divaldo wrote some books that can be amazing stories, and they connect the human being himself. They don't connect to any spiritualism doctrine. It comes after. You know what I mean? I try to put a tag of it. There is no tag here. If you are Baptist, if you are Hindu, if you are Muslim, if you are Catholic, you can just watch this story because it tells about something that is common to everywhere, which is human beings. I'm speaking a lot. I'm sorry. I start going on and on, and I don't stop.
That's okay.
All I can say is it's a pleasure to listen to you. We're all like transfixed because it's incredible. I really now get what you're saying about, because I was imagining how do you choose which to put in the movie, but it's not about that. It's about what is the core idea that you want to put, and that's absolutely amazing. And I really like this idea that you're talking to a universal public, because this is what we need. We need to talk to everybody. We need to look at things that unite us and not the things that separate us. We need to build bridges and not walls. And I think by doing that and looking for what is our common humanity, and that makes me think, it's like the experiences, the spiritual experiences, they're common human experiences. And I was just thinking about the book by Dr. Peter Fenwick about experiences at the deathbed. And he did research, the psychiatrist did research into dying, and from a psychological, psychiatric point of view. And when he did the research, he said it actually, people see their dead relatives coming to fetch them when they're dying slowly, like in a hospice, when they're dying over a period of some days and things. So he was interviewing the dying people. And he said it makes no difference if the person is Christian or Muslim or Hindu or atheist. they still see their relatives come to fetch them. And then when he says, who comes to fetch you? And it's usually like parents or let's say the wife, the husband, or siblings. They're persons that had a strong personal connection that come, and they tell them they're coming to fetch them, to take them, in the next couple of days or something like that. So he was saying how this is a human experience, regardless of your culture and society. And then he asked one person, says, well, everybody's having these experiences here in the hospice, so why has nobody told us about it? And then one of the persons said, well, nobody asked us. You know what I mean? You're not going to, another one said, you're not going to start saying you've seen dead people. Well, they're going to think you're going crazy. So just, you just talk to them in your mind,
Yes.
keep it quiet. But now that you ask, I tell you. So this was so interesting. He says, why does nobody say? Because nobody's asked. So I'm just thinking about the universality of human experiences and human experiences relating to spiritual events. And I'm really fascinated by that, because I just think that when the walls are coming down, it's just going to be a tsunami of, even like people say, oh, reincarnation. Do you ever imagine those people way back in, the 20th century that didn't acknowledge reincarnation? They're going to think like, wow, what were we doing? Because it's just going to become normal knowledge that every human being has access to, isn't it?
And the amazing part, just to add a little bit to what you said, and it is the response to that is that when I listen to people everywhere in the world, like Kardec's senior biography is in 180 countries, and I've spoken to people in Russia, in Australia, in Finland, Denmark, and it is all the same response. If you manage to connect to that small line that connects us all, you're doing the right thing. That's a pursuit, that's something that we look for, and when we find, we're in the right path,
Well, you just enlightened the movie to us, because after you told that, I can reevaluate the movie in a better way. And one of the things that the movie actually does is to address to this very universal experience of awakening, of a transformation, internal and also philosophical transformation, and the conversion from a person into a new being. And that's the story we would like to hear about Buddha, or about Paul on the way to Damascus, or something like that. And this is actually pretty universal, and brings us a character that is rich in himself and powerful in himself, despite our our thoughts or beliefs about what he wrote. And many small details draw my attention in the movie. For example, just to quote one, I was very impressed with the very young actresses, and how competent they were. But also, we here in the University of Juiz de Fora, we have a purely academic project called Kardec Project, on the letters of Kardec. And one of our colleagues, analyzing the handwriting of Kardec, said, well, this is artistic work. This is almost a drawing, or a very careful way of writing, and it expresses a completely different way of thinking and communicating with other people, comparing to the way we communicate now, very uncarefully and very quickly, almost not thinking about what we are saying or about what we are reading. And at the time, people had to be, because of the context, very careful, because they were dealing with paradigms and social standards that they should not touch without serious consequences. and they were in themselves very serious people who took their time to write and to read, and always took care about what they were saying. So all these small details, they are present in this atmosphere that you brought to light with the help of many competent other professionals, certainly. And we can see that the small choices make a lot of difference because, for example, filming in Paris, regarding a character that is well known and has admirers and fans, so to say, and followers, is a very conservative decision, because some people would identify the places where Kardec lived and would say, well, this is not the place where he should be. But building the entire atmosphere, we bring this very human, very universal experience that you're talking about to us. It make it flesh and bones, so we can really relate to this experience.
Yeah. And I wanted to say as well that for me, that's one of the joys of the film, that it's not bringing so much the side of Spiritism itself, but this story about this guy, this educator, this guy who went to study in Switzerland, who set up his own school in Paris, who then became frustrated and then found these things going on which evoked this, like Humberto said, this new life within him. This life that led him to bring this philosophy onto paper for us to all be able to look at and study. And so a question I had for you, Wagner, is, would you ever consider making a prequel that highlights these investigations of Kardec into magnetism, or even his youth in Switzerland, or perhaps even his time that he lived in London? Or would you even do a follow-up based on Humberto's good friend Leon Denis?
I would consider shooting the good stories, Adam. But we've had conversations with Netflix, considering to shoot the sequence of the sequel of Kardec's lives. Because we just went until the burning of the books, and I knew people were complaining. Oh, that's not the whole story of Kardec. I knew people were gonna say that. It is understandable, and it is okay. People would love to see more. We had to pick choices, and we made the things that we understood they should be made. Yet, I love the idea. Those conversations, they were not moved ahead, and mostly because of the pandemic. I think people just went upside down, everywhere, and the streaming got so powerful in terms of money and in terms of producing, that I think this time is going to come sooner or later, that we would reconnect to understand what we can evolve from there. And I would love to tell the story about Kardec's trips and Kardec's fights with the churches. And mostly, I would love to tell the story about his wife after he passes away, because she faces a lawsuit against the spiritualism movement, the spiritualistic movement, and I think it is a remarkable woman doing a remarkable defense, and to me, Amélie, which is something that I was working a lot, was to portray people, the wife, because she has been hidden from the historical books, and she was so important as well, and she was beside him in every single meeting of those early years, and she was intelligent, she was smart, she was something that was devoted to the cause as well. So I think those stories should be told once in a while, sooner or later, and it is all a matter of pinpoint the right moment. It's interesting because you see the story coming, You see the moment coming, and then you don't lose the momentum. And I think now we have to rebuild the moment within the Astral City things, and then we're gonna rebuild moments in every other place. It's just like the novellas, Adam. I wrote 2 novellas at Global TV. Both novellas were made on the basic grounds of the reincarnation idea of past lives and reincarnation. One was Além do Tempo that you mentioned, and the other one was Espelho da Vida, which took place in 2018. When we were at the momentum, and the momentum is gone, and now we have to understand what we bring now, what kind of things that people are going to be willing to watch after we go through these terrible moments. In Brazil, I used to say that Brazil faces a pandemic and a pandemonium. The pandemic is due to the virus, and the pandemonium is due to the government. So after both are gone, hopefully, we are working on things that we call the goodwill stories. Stories that can bring you up. That have to say, let's get out of a war. Like the UK knows what a war itself is. Like the UK knows what is to be destroyed as a country. Brazil as a country never heard of that, never knew it, indeed, in real terms. And I think now Brazil is devastated. It is a devastated land. And it is sad to say that. It may sound even cold to say that, but we've cried so much already during the late 18 months. We've suffered so much that it's now time to start breathing again, to get our vaccines. I was already vaccinated, half vaccinated, and start to get the teachings. Now we have to get the teachings. And because before that, we just need to console each other, to help each other. And I think those stories might be in the surf again. I don't know if I may say so, but I mean those stories might be in the target again.
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting, because when you were talking about it, I'm very mindful. I work in the National Health Service here in the UK, and that was born after the Second World War. And it's something that the whole country is very proud of. It's a system that, of course, has many difficulties as well, but it was like a symbol of a new time and something that a country could do for all its people. But it was born out of the ashes of war or something really destructive. So it's like the story of the phoenix. You're going through destruction and difficulties at the moment, but new things will be reborn and come out of it. And that is quite exciting, although the process of the pain is uncomfortable and unfortunate for everybody. But I have great hope that good things will come. And people, it's when the communities come together, they can build whatever they like. Even people, I think, like my experience of Brazil was everybody's always looking to the government, looking to the father, looking to somebody over there to solve their problems. But the solution is here. Let's get together, our brothers and sisters. Let's make our own solutions. And I totally believe in the creative power of people in Brazil to find solutions as soon as they feel empowered in some way, to say, you have solutions, you can find the way, rather than looking for some mystical, magical solution coming from outside. And that's about our relationship with God as well. When we think about this transformation, about a God that's not a God that's going to come and save us like a hero on a white horse. It's not that. It's that it's giving us the power that we have the ability to transform things as well. And I find that's really sort of hopeful and optimistic. And I really look forward to the future to see what interesting things are going to come up.
Amazing words, Anne. Me too. Thank you.
And you just talking just now about finding solutions. And we know that during the pandemic, obviously theatres, cinemas, galleries, museums, and almost everything else related to arts has been shut down around the world. But what are your thoughts about having access to pre-recorded shows, to live stream concerts, virtual museum and gallery visits during this pandemic?
I think there was a nice initiative. There was something amazing that was done. I myself watched a lot of lives. Amazing singers. They were like singing for free. We couldn't put our movies for free because we have deals prior to the pandemic, and we couldn't redo contracts and whatever. But I mean, I think it was a time that it is still a time full of lessons, full of pain and lessons. I mean, the spiritists say we're gonna get through this, and this is the important thing is how you're gonna get through, and what you have done during the process, right, Annie? Just like what you said. So, to me, Adam, understanding how culture is important is something else that has been understood. People they just learned that they need musicians. They just learned that they need audiovisual storytelling. They just learned that they need books. I mean, most of the people, I hope, and that's a reinforcement of the importance of culture and art in order to save and protect our souls. This is very spiritualistic, and this is something that, to me, I've been during all these months, these last months, I've been asking mediums, what have you been watching? Just like Kardec, talking to people in the south of Brazil, in the west of Brazil, in the north of Brazil, here in Rio, in São Paulo, and saying, tell me, what is your mediumship telling you? What have you been watching? And it is interesting to do that, because sometimes at a certain point you find out that, there is something that they are saying it is the same, which is it has been a whole big change in the spiritual world as well. Within the pandemic and people at home, spirits, a higher level spirits, are working with this unbelievable amount of spirits that are lost in their umbral zones. They need to be rescued. So the amount of rescue has been multiplied in 1,000 times, because the connections were lost. People were locked down, and they could rebuild the streets. They could rebuild dark zones that need to be rebuilt. So we don't have a clue of the quantity, the amount of work that the spirituality has been doing in the atmosphere. What we know is that they have been working a lot. So there's something that we noticed immediately. I mean, all these spiritual centers, they were shut, right? They were locked. And on the other hand, people were praying from their houses at first time. So everyday connections made our houses stronger, which is something that I was just to do once in a week. The code of the Godspell at home, and now we do that every day. We do a WhatsApp connection. We just listen to each other, and it's like 15 minutes every day. That's something that has come to stay. And I mean, not to mention all the other changes with people who are wearing masks, but they're real wolf faces, wolf in the lamb's coat, and people were hiding in their faces, but they are showing up their souls, which happened a lot in terms of living in society, empathy, sorority, and other stories. So we are in a big melting pot. Things are burning, and what is left to us to believe. It's something that they keep saying, and it's something that is usual. Just get going, believe, and move on. Do your part. Let's do your part.
And that would just make me think about something that Adam said right at the beginning of the show today, saying, situation here of the pandemic in the UK is all change again. We're on the third surge, and are they going to open? Are they going to close? What are they going to... At the end of the day, it's like a moment of freedom, which, although it's it seems the opposite of that. But it is a moment when we have a freedom to see how will we behave. So if people say, I'm fed up, I'm not wearing my mask anymore, that's everybody, each one has responsibility for their choices. So it's really interesting. It doesn't matter if other people are not doing their bit, as long as, okay, I think that this is what I should do. I think that this is what is correct. I think this is what's respectful to my brothers and sisters whose immune system might be weaker than mine. I will put it on, and that's my choice. So I think this great freedom is like saying, okay, you have the information, now what do you do? And like you say, you reveal your inner being by your actions outside. And people say, well, we want to end the lockdown because we're tired. We're tired of what? I just think about, I work with the elderly people, we call it the war generation, like they're all in the 80s now. They lived through the bombings. And they say, okay, tired of the bombings? Did you just say to the other country that was throwing the bombs, can you just stop throwing now because I'm tired? I'll just, no. I think sometimes it's just thinking, okay, it's unpleasant, it's uncomfortable, but what can I do with what I've got? How can I make this, have a spiritual view of this? Or like I was reading somewhere today, I really liked it from a Native American Indian, saying, have the eagle's view, like you're up in the sky and you're seeing it all. Have the eagle's view instead of having the mouse's view, like just you can see what's right in front of your nose. Put yourself as the eagle, see the bigger picture, and say, okay, I have some restrictions of some of my freedoms, but I have other freedoms that I've never had before, and just put it in context and make those choices so that you feel you really, where do you, it's the stand up and be counted. Where do you stand? And it's like the masks are falling, not and people are being revealed. So it's interesting times that we're living in, and I make no judgments of others. I'm just talking about myself and about my own personal challenges to be coherent and to try and do my best and to think, why am I upset about this? Why am I bothered about this? Why is it affecting me? Where is the X of the equation in this situation? And I think that's really useful, so that we live conscious lives rather than being on automatic pilot.
I agree 100%.
May I say just something? Of course, it is healthy to prefer happiness to sorrow and sadness, and to prefer health to sickness and illness. But at the same time, it is wise to understand that to be in the comfort zone may be not so good for us. So these challenging times, these times of trouble, they test parts of us that could remain undeveloped or unexercised if we were not so strongly demanded and tested.
Let's go now to our question for What Does Spiritism Say About? Annie, the question we have is, what does Spiritism say about sexuality?
This is a massive question that would require a whole program on its own. And I'm just wondering what the person that's asking the question, what they really want to know. I think that what I can refer to is interesting information that we can find in the Spirits book around question 200, 201 and 202, in which Kardec asks the spirits if a man can be incarnated in a woman's body, or if a woman can be incarnated in a man's body, if we can be swapping the types of bodies we have. And he said, of course, because as spirits, I'll use his own words, says the same spirits animate men and women. So I would say, and this is what it says as well, we have to have the perspective that the body that we are given, that we choose or however it comes to be, the body we have in this incarnation is the instrument of our incarnation. It doesn't define us. It's our instrument to use, to interact, and to be in life. And different types of bodies can give us access to different types of opportunities, experiences, situations. So for me, being a woman today in the UK, it's very different from me, for example, being a woman in a different countries where I might not have the same freedoms or access to education or health. Likewise, in the past, if I were to be a man, I could be engaged in activities that perhaps were not allowed to the women, and so on. But I did say something earlier on, and I bring it back again, that there is diversity in nature everywhere you look. So nothing is clearly defined. So I would say that not going into all the discussions around gender and sexuality, but thinking about just the physicality, the physiology and anatomy of the bodies we have. They are the instruments that we are using. The spirits, they say, they don't have those anatomies. The spirits can incarnate as women, can incarnate as men, and the variety just goes on. So I don't want to go on too much about it. I just hope that gives a little bit of the flavor, and you're thinking about where is this question going and what do you really want to be thinking about. Because it is an ongoing discussion in society today, which we're all like trying to make sense, because we have this freedom in which we can discuss these things openly and trying to find, and it's about what are the limits of the spirit. The spirit doesn't have any limits. We are eternal beings and we are destined to perfection, and we will have an infinite number of experiences. We put that in context, and that kind of changes a limited view of, a situation that's very temporary. But like I say, it is a very delicate subject. It's a subject that deals with forces that we are perhaps we're not able yet to understand fully how all these things work. But I think maybe just start thinking a little bit along the lines of what I could contribute at this point. I hope that helps the person who asked the question.
Well, from a philosophical perspective, I think it is relevant to stress that we are wrong in thinking about ourselves as male or female, because our bodies are male or female. And of course, because we live a more material life, we are used to relate ourselves to our bodies. But actually, I am an I, a self, and a person that is independent of these psychological and physiological configurations that we need to express ourselves in the material world. So the first big step to understand the issues of gender and sexuality is stop thinking about ourselves as bodies, and to understand that I am a self, an I who can have different material experiences, but these material experiences do not define me.
Well, in our last episode, we were talking about mediumship. We know that at a certain level, we are all mediums. But how does this work regarding art, music and films? Can friends from the spiritual plane help us, inspire us and guide us when we're creating anything artistic? And how could we feel this influence?
People ask me about that question sometimes, in terms of what kind of influence or what kind of perceptions do we have about the influence. And my answer is kind of fuzzy, but I mean, this is very honest because I don't know exactly. It's not official, but of course, We know spirits are around us, they guide us, they influence us more than we think. This is one of the questions, more than we ever think. But officially, what I know and what I've heard is that we have to do our work. We cannot avoid our responsibilities. We cannot avoid our mistakes as well. So we have to keep going, keep working. And if they come to teach you, it's merit. If they come to help you in a way that you don't even feel it, it's more merit yet. But to me, I don't stop and say, "Hey, can you guys do it for me?" Because I think that would be too embarrassing, because I'm the one who is asking for the chance. So if I ask for the chance and ask them to make it, it's not going to be valuable. And if it were for them to do it, they would do it in a different way. They would pick up real mediums, automatic mediums or whatever, and they would do it the way they want. This is how, when they want to do that, they do it from a straight and a very valid mediumship way. But of course, when you're dealing with art, we are dealing with the spiritual human the human spirit, and this is something that you cannot disconnect. And uh, the answer, yeah, is mostly yes. There is a lot of influence. There is influence from my past lives. There is influence from my imperfection. There is influence from my enemies. And there is influence from my friends, and we are all together in the same dimension, based in two different material density. And so there's something that, in terms of what we see in the movies, as far as I understand the movies that I've been through, there hasn't been a lot of phenomena or whatever. Everything works properly as it should be working on a movie set. And yet, I don't ask anyone that comes to work with me if he's a spiritist, or if he believes in the spiritism, whatever. That's something that I'm never gonna do. And I think that spiritism is not something that has to work as a tag. Again, I'm against the tags, right? So if I do that, I'm I'm behaving improperly. I'm just uh, being something that the spiritism doesn't need to. So I haven't seen so many phenomena at all. I like to say, I like to believe that the biggest phenomenon is when we turn the camera on, and this is when I can see Kardec, or I can see the spiritual world, or whatever is going to come out to.
Well, quite interesting. It is also remarkable how inspiration was well known since ancient times. The old spiritual books, from the Upanishads to the Druids in French Gaul and in Britain, the Greek poets and the prophets in the Bible were very aware that some alien exterior force was leading them in their thoughts and feelings, and even giving them energy to fulfill the tasks they had ahead. And Plato was a very good example in this sense. He, as a Greek man, he acknowledged the presence of the muses in any sort of elevated and relevant work that men could ever accomplish. But there is a small book from Plato called Ion, where Plato actually discussed prophetic inspiration in relation to the artistic work. This book also reminds me of Leon Denis' masterpiece on spiritualistic art, which is Spiritism in the Arts. Fortunately, we have this book in English now available. And Plato said that the same faculty that made the prophets aware of a mission or a revelation that they should deliver to humanity is the faculty that the poets and the musicians use to express maybe not a message, but beauty and goodness to humanity.
Amazing. uh, uh, this is why. This is the reason that I don't close the questions when I answer them. It's there, but I mean, and it is also because movie making is a very industry's proceeding. Is enough. It's a work of an industrial process, and it is something that you don't relate to art sometimes. It is just about hiring people, and feeding them, transporting them, and putting up like a show for 300 people every day, shooting 12 hours a day, and traveling, and camera stuff, and lighting equipment, and so on. But I mean, the spiritual world is everywhere, which means you never say no. You can never say no.
Well, there are two people who we think have probably had a lot of inspiration in their lives. Have you heard about Eileen Kramer? Well, Eileen is an Australian dancer and choreographer who spent the early part of her life working in Paris and America, dancing in famous shows with people such as Louis Armstrong. At a sprightly 106 years of age, she is still working, performing and creating choreography, and more importantly, has banned the words old and age from her vocabulary. In a recent interview she said, "I'm not old, I've just been here a long time and learnt a few things along the way. I don't feel how people say you should feel when you're old. My attitude to creating things is identical to when I was a child." Now, as well as working on a film called The God Tree, she is enjoying life in her native Australia and dedicates to writing a story a day. And have you heard about this unlikely YouTube star? An 84-year-old ex-farmer, John Butler from the UK, has found fame within the ASMR, Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response community, with his softly spoken wise words about living a positive life. His YouTube channel, Spiritual Unfoldment with John Butler, has over 172,000 subscribers and has regular videos of John speaking delicately about life, meditation and spiritual connection. John was actually one of the first organic farmers in the UK and attributes the fact that he has used meditation for over 60 years as being the possible reason for his softly spoken approach. Now, John has been thanked by many people over this past year and a half who found his videos beneficial to help them with their anxieties during the pandemic. So I think there is a lot that we can learn from both Eileen and John. Wagner, before we end, what can you tell us about the other projects you have planned and that we can expect over the next few years?
Adam, I'm gonna start shooting this huge documentary next month, because I think the sanitary conditions are getting better and we can go out with a small crew, which is about Chico Xavier. And I decided to do that because next year we're gonna be remembering the 20th anniversary of Chico's departure. Chico's passing away, and I think we need a place where we can tell people this is what Chico Xavier were, because we have that in books. We have like more than 10 biographies, people written about Chico, but we don't have a documentary. You have a fiction movie about Chico, which was shot and released in 2009, right before Astral City, and it is a movie that is a certain look to Chico's life, but it doesn't get us it doesn't gather not at least 10% of what his life worth. I think that's my opinion, and I think we can produce a wonderful and astonishing material of Chico Xavier with all these faces, with all his Chico as a medium, Chico as a celebrity, Chico as a guy that gave us a legacy, Chico as in the backstages, Chico as Chico 20 years later. I mean, there is so much new things that I've been finding out about Chico, and I go to places, people get my hand and say, "Come over here." And I was at a place about an old lady called Nena Galvez. Chico was her host for 30 years in São Paulo, so he had his own room at her house, and she opened the room for me, and she opened the drawers, and there was like several papers, and I mean, people, Chico's handwriting and things that nobody ever saw it. And so I decided to make a movie, not only a movie, I decided to make a series of documentaries about Chico and have it translated as to much language as possible. So someone in Japan that says, about this guy who lived in Brazil, is called Chico Xavier. How do I get to know about him? Just watch it, and we're going to try to put as much as we can about this man called Chico Xavier, and in different documentaries, or maybe one major documentary feature film and other small or an hour episodes documentaries, and try to get it in streaming, a nice streaming channel. And if we don't succeed, I'm gonna release it myself to different places. But I think Chico deserves that. The new generation of spiritualists in spiritism, they must learn more from the man, the work, and the whole universe that surrounds a man like Chico. So I'm gonna be doing that. I'm gonna interview more than 100 people already. They were already listening, and I'm gonna be interviewing more people as much as needed. And I'm gonna also shoot Nosso Lar 2, The Messengers, as soon as we have sanitary conditions. And there are other movies that are in the roll, and I rather wait to give the good news as soon as they are fully ready to be made. One movie that I can advance, I mean, two movies that I can advance, there are already in development and already partially financed, is one movie about the Fox sisters. This is going to be an English spoken movie. The Fox sisters were the pioneers of the whole spiritualism movement in America, 19th century America. And I'm going to do a movie which is a very challenging story to tell about Emmanuel, which is Chico Xavier's mentor. So I want to be telling the story of his 7 lives since he was a senator in Rome until the moment that he works with Chico in the 20th century. So that's quite a journey, and that's quite daring and challenging for me. But I mean, all those projects are in development, I mean, screenplays are ready, and it's about money, time, the momentum. It's about creating the momentum, and we are going to be announcing through the Instagram and from, social media as much as we can.
Great. Well, thank you, Wagner. And we certainly look forward to seeing these films and documentaries coming out as soon as they're available. Well, thank you all for your thoughts and considerations today, but it's now time for our moment of reflection. Annie, what have you got for us?
Yeah, it's interesting. I randomly chose a passage from Recipes for Peace by the Spirit Joanna de Ângelis through the mediumship of Divaldo Franco. And I'll just read it slowly and just take from it whatever speaks to your soul. It says, perseverance in the higher ideals of life is one of the most difficult challenges for person intent and goodness. When one stage ends, another one unfolds ahead. Once a difficulty is overcome, another is outlined. A step given, is an opportunity to conquer distances. A job done is the beginning of more challenging tasks. And when we believe that the more serious hindrances have been surpassed, further difficulties and harder to surmount obstacles arise. The undertaking, however, cannot be any different. Each victory entitles the individual to the more audacious attempts, rather than to the limitations of inaction. Exercise is the patient master that qualifies any person for more complex achievements. What presently appears impossible later becomes a completed accomplishment.
Suits for me.
It seems like it was perfectly chosen, no? It's for all of us.
I know. I was selfish. But it's about movie making, you know?
It fits, doesn't it? It just makes us think that when we think that we have an obstacle, a difficulty, to overcome it, the next one will be bigger because we will be greater, we will be more able.
Thank you, Annie. Well, friends, we are at the end of another episode. So please remember to contact us to let us know your thoughts and comments, as well as your questions for What Does Spiritism Say About? You can contact us here via the Kardec Group's social media accounts. You can email us at insightfully@kardec.org.uk or drop us a line via our website www.kardec.org.uk, where you can also find details about our group, about the High Five fundraising campaign, as well as finding the links to the previous episodes of this show. So it just leaves me to give a great big thank you to our guest, Wagner de Assis. For me to say thank you to my co-hosts, Annie Sinclair and Humberto Schubert. And for me to thank all of you who have got to the very end of this show once again. My name is Adam Osborne, and I hope you can join us again next time for another episode of Insightfully Speaking, looking at the world from a spiritist perspective.